Good evening, all. I am Manju Rose Matthews, Head of the Department of Media Studies, Christ Nagar College, Maranellur, Trivandrum, India. On behalf of Principal Dr. Jolie Jacob, Director and Manager, Reverend Dr. Tito Verghese, CMI, Program Coordinator, Emil Abraham, Reverend Father Tinto Pulinjuvelil, CMI, Tara CB, and Nino PK, we welcome you all to this webinar on investigative journalism. This event is a tribute to the legendary journalist and editor, Sir Harold Evans, who left us September 23rd. We are privileged to have award-winning journalists Said Nazagat and Josie Joseph as speakers for this webinar on investigative journalism. We had a great response for this webinar and have received more than 1,100 registrations from all over India. We have media students, media educators, researchers, journalists, and media professionals joining us from India and abroad. Wishing you all a great session of learning. Harold Evans was a fearless campaigner and a champion of free press. In his 70 years as a journalist, he never lost sight of the need to maintain integrity in the profession. He was a giant of investigative journalism, uncovering great injustices and informing the public without fear or favor. One of his most famous investigations exposed the plight of hundreds of British thalidomide children who had never received any compensation for their birth defects. Evans organized a campaign to take on pharma companies responsible for manufacturing the drug, an effort and eventually won compensation for the families after more than a decade. It was a relentless fight for justice. Evans was at the helm of Sunday Times for over 14 years. He later became editor of the Times of London shortly after media mogul Rupert Murdoch purchased the paper in 1981. Evans left a year later in a dispute with Murdoch over editorial independence. Evans founded the famous Condé Nast Traveler magazine and served as president and publisher of the prestigious Random House Publishing from 1990 to 1997. Evans left Random House in 1997 to take over as editorial director and vice president of Morton B. Zuckerman's publications, including US News and World Report and The Atlantic, but stepped down in 2000 to devote more time to speeches and books. He authored several books which are great testimony to his writing skills and journalistic excellence. He was an editor at large at Reuters since 2011. Young journalists and media students need to learn more about Harold Evans, his writings, his books, and his skills as an editor. Our tribute to one of the iconic journalists of our times, Sir Harold Evans. Our first speaker is Zaid Nazagat. Zaid Nazagat is an award-winning international journalist, media entrepreneur, founder, and editor-in-chief of Data.Leads. Data.Leads is a Delhi-based media firm which conducts data analysis, visualization, Pan-Asia bootcamps, and India's first award-winning data-driven website dedicated to healthcare reporting. Health Analytics Asia is a flagship initiative of Data.Leads and is a multi-platform publisher of health news and information dedicated to building collaboration between journalists, health professionals, and doctors by combining mass media, data, and technology. Said also leads Center for Investigative Journalism, a non-profit organization he founded to promote the cause of watchdog journalism in India. He has more than 17 years of experience across broadcast, print, and online journalism, and has reported from over 35 countries. He has uncovered some of the biggest stories in India, winning international recognition and many awards. Over the past decade, has revealed stories about secret torture chambers in India, the country's rendition program in Nepal, suicides in the military, arms smuggling in Bangladesh, misuse of anti-terrorism laws, corruption in arms procurement, poor condition of prisons, women trafficking from Afghanistan, and war in South Sudan. He was the first Indian journalist to report from an Al-Qaeda rehabilitation camp in Saudi Arabia. And in 2013, he secured unprecedented access to the military detention facility in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, to report about the prison abuse cases. Said has been the recipient of several national and international journalism awards, including India's prestigious Ramnath Goenka Excellence in Journalism Award, Karmavir Puraskar National Award, and the Christian Amanpour Award, British Medical Journal Award, finalist for Daniel Pearl Award for Outstanding International Investigative Reporting, Geneva, Kutskok International Award, London, German Development Media Award, Berlin, and Beox Calvados Award for War Correspondence, 2014, France. Participants can ask questions to the speakers through the link we shared in the chat box. Our moderator, Tara Sebi, shall pick the best questions and ask the speakers. Participants can also vote up the best question that need to be put up to the speakers. Please look into the chat box for the link. And now, let us welcome Zaid Nazagat. Zaid shall speak about data and investigative journalism, how data could drive the future of information landscape. Welcome, Zaid.
Thank you so much, Professor Manju Jose, for this generous introduction. I was thinking you would just say a line or so, but thank you so much for a very generous introduction. I'm really pleased to be part of this special webinar to honor an incredible editor and journalist who was a torchbearer for watchdog journalism for almost 55, 60 years. And I'm really glad also becoming part of this webinar, essentially, also because we are at a very critical juncture globally in terms of where do we stand in terms of watchdog journalism. And I'm going to share my slides, couple of slides. I thought like it will be better just to make a couple of points, and then we can open for question and answer. Manju, you can help me with one thing. If you can tell me whether you're seeing my one slide or two slides.
Yeah, one slide.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. So I think it's really like a really, I can say, a unique position, a unique moment for journalism in a broader sense, for watchdog journalism, for data-driven journalism. It's another you can say a space which is available and which has become available in the last 10 years. Let me come to the watchdog journalism, because essentially we all seriously believe in this thing that investigative reporting is the crux of journalism. It is the heartbeat of journalism. Watchdog reporting is the heart of journalism, and is also a profession, is a skill set. Like in journalism, there are different beats, there are different reporters, editors at different levels, and similarly, there's a one special segment of in the newsroom, which essentially are identified as investigative journalists. Essentially, they're journalists. But what they do is they do things a little bit differently. They go a little bit more in depth. They try to go beyond the traditional boundaries, try to cover a lot of stuff which someone in the power of authority is trying to hide for the people. So we call them like a special forces of journalism, essentially, because at the end of the day, the public, people at large, have a right to know what's happening in the society, because whatever decisions are made by the government within the society, within the country, within the region, it affects each one of us. And people have a main source of information, which is essentially from media. And if media decides not to tell those stories, which are so critical to them, then eventually we go into this darkness where we really we are not able to distinguish what's wrong, what's good, what's happening, and what's not happening. So the critical job of journalism or watchdog journalism essentially is to put a spotlight on the stories which someone is trying to hide, which someone does not allow people to see and people to know that this is happening. So I think that is really a critical place of journalism, and it also essentially, if you see the history of journalism, the watchdog journalism has by and large created history. It has shaped histories of countries across the globe in the last 100, 200 years. You have so many incidences where the presidents, prime ministers, you have the history of Philippines in front of you, where two presidents were removed from the office because of the journalism which was done by the journalists, Filipino journalists. You have a history of, like so many other countries, in our country as well, so many stories which become discussion points in the parliament and which eventually shaped the policies and decisions of the government of that time, actually. So what are the emerging threats in the next 10, 15 minutes quickly? What are the emerging situations in terms of journalism and essentially about data journalism? What's happening in India or outside India on data and investigative journalism? I can say there are a lot of things happening, but in the last, if you can look back in last 5 to 10 years, you can see the data, the numbers have become integral part of any big major global investigative story. Why? There's a very serious reason for that. It was not like as if we started using numbers and data just in the last 5, 10 years. No, journalists have always been dealing with numbers. But what I mean by when we say data-driven watchdog reporting, it essentially that the data sets the tone of story, that it becomes the focus and it becomes the leading light in which way and direction a story should move. So essentially, data, essentially documentation, and essentially what those documents are telling us about a human source who we already have as a watchdog journalist. So I think it also happened. Why is this thing happening? Why these lot of data, a lot of documentations are becoming available to public, which was not the case 10, 15, 20 years before. For centuries, that essentially the journalists were hunting for information all the time. They were looking for sound bites. They were looking for interviews. They were going from politicians to the administration to the parliament to the different places of government to collect the information and to then see what's happening. But in the last 10, 15 years, we have seen also because of internet, there's a huge information which is available, freely available to larger extent to people, which was not the case before. Like all the parliament proceedings, all the budgets, all the audit reports, everything almost is available on internet globally, I'm saying, of course, in India also to some extent. So all this data is really a truckload of data. But then we figured out that somehow we do not know or we don't have enough skills to make sense of this information, of all these documentation, which is available online in the PDF, Excel, Word file, in different shapes and formats. So that, if you look in the history of journalism, is a very unique moment. Because for centuries, for 200-300 years, we were trained in journalism colleges and schools that this is how we have to practice journalism, that we have to collect information. But what if the information is available, you have to just analyze it? You need different skills for that. And that is the challenge, and that is the process through which this generation is growing. Because it doesn't really matter, the medium really doesn't matter, whether you're a TV journalist or a newspaper or a digital website, it doesn't really matter as long as you're doing journalism. You can use any medium, you can use any deliverable platform to broad, like right now we are doing Zoom call. And this is also a part of information and part of media exercise and outreach. So the platforms can change, but the essence of journalism remains there. But then the tools and techniques are also changing, and the journalists have to make sense whether they have these tools and techniques and new approaches to understand this new transformation which is happening in the larger landscape, information landscape. We also say this data is also coming in the shape of open data. That essentially means the data which has been made public for people. That includes health data, the budgets, the elections, like almost everything out there. And you can see in most of Europe now, all this data is freely available. You can check the records of, you can go back 100, 200 years, check the figure, check the number, and then analyze the situation, how things have improved or not improved. To some extent in India, we tried, I think 10, 15 years back, there were a lot of focus, a lot of discussion about it with RTI and all, but somehow we are still struggling with the concept of open data. But I can still say there is a fairly large amount of data available with different functionaries of the government in different states and at different levels. Some states are doing good in making more data and more information available to public. Some states, it's not happening at that, you can say, within that transparency. But in the larger, you can say, a scheme of things, there is data, there is information, there are documentation, there are a lot of stuff which is available and becoming available to people almost every single day now. And where does this data really come from? It's coming from across. It's like the banks, it's like your personal data, it's like even your child, for that matter, has a huge global significance. The data you create by your footfalls, all this data is getting stored at different levels. And the future we are seeing essentially like 2030, if you look at like the next 10, 15 years, we will be in a different world. I'm pretty sure about that. We will have more information than ever. And our challenge will be how to analyze this information, how to make sense of these numbers, how to make sense of these documents. And we need people in our profession who are really sharp, looking at numbers, looking at documents, and trying to analyze them and trying to make sense of those documents. I think the future generation, I can come back to that maybe in the later part, needs some different skills. And the journalism college and universities really have to make sure that they're teaching these skills to the new generation of storytellers. Coming back to the watchdog journalism globally, despite there's so much, you can say, pessimism about the future of journalism, about the space, the narrowing space for free speech and media, but I think somehow the global investigative journalism community is also finding its own space and a new moment, which was not there 10, 20 years before. At a global platform, there's an organization called Global Investigative Journalism Network. I'm one of the board members there and part of this global movement. Every second year, we invite almost 1,000 to 2,000 editors and journalists across the world, almost more than 110 countries, to one single platform where we discuss story ideas, we discuss collaborations, we discuss new ways of working. And if you have followed global scene of watchdog journalism, you'll come across this organization which is based in Washington called ICIJ, which is International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, which is essentially a collaborative atmosphere. And what they do essentially is that they invite journalists all across the world to come together and collaborate on big stories. Of course, you know about a story called Panama Papers, which was a huge global story. I think one of the biggest watchdog story in the history of journalism, but it was not a single man show. There were more than 112 journalists from 60 countries who worked together in collaboration for more than a year. And then they analyzed and essentially investigated the financial entities and records of more than 30 years. And eventually it became a 1 million document set, which they went through, analyzed, and they made sense of it. And you know the results of this story still even today. And so many top politicians in so many countries have to leave their office because of the impact of this story. But this was just a one big story. And after that, you can see there are so many other stories at New York Times, at BBC. There was a story just a couple of I think months back about the huge global corruption in the manufacturing of medical equipments, huge database. Just last week, the ICIJ did another big collaboration in association with a number of journalists around the world about financial transactions by the big political players, including some from India. So the thing is that the future we're looking at right now will be somewhere where we have too much information, and somehow we have to make sense of that information. We have seen already that some newsrooms are already trying to create their own databases. They're using the satellites, they're using a lot of different softwares. Even at ICIJ, they've worked with different technologies to secure the database they had. So I think in future, there will be organizations which will try to create databases on particular areas and then build their storytelling in that area. You also look at RTI, which is again like going through a little bit rough phase in India, and we're having challenges there, but still almost 4.5 million, and that's the old record, 4 million, that is 40 lakh applications are submitted every year in India. Just imagine for a journalist, this means 4 million stories. This means 4 million records. And I see a huge space, though we are certainly facing serious challenges there in RTI, but I think still I see a huge space in terms of exploring this space and making a database of your own. You never know, the governments tomorrow, they may remove this all data, but you can create a future lab for the future generation of journalists and storytellers. And I can see a huge space for a research in this area as well. On health, during COVID, our flagship project at Health Analytics Asia, like our journalists looked at how can we look at the source of the COVID, which is essentially a zoonotic disease which spreads from animals to humans, and COVID is one such terrible disease. So our journalists, a team of journalists headed by a wonderful young data journalist, she went through 6 million records of legal trade in wildlife in the middle of COVID, in the March, and I think in March and April this year, when the COVID was at its peak. And she went across the world and collected the database, essentially looking at what's happening. Why was China allowing illegal and legal trade of wildlife, despite knowing that this can create a pandemic and this can create a serious situation, bioviral disease? So that story was, I think, one of the finest pieces of reporting on COVID in the early phase. And I see similar spaces in so many different areas of improving the way we tell stories to our audiences. And globally, again, when I look at, with our colleagues in Asia or Africa and Europe and America, we see journalists are coming together and they are trying to collaborate. They're coming together, they're trying to support each other in this difficult phase where we are having challenges in different countries for free speech, for independent journalism. And that is a really beautiful thing. And I think somewhere down the line, the future essentially is when we listen to each other, learn from each other, collaborate with others, not really within the journalism, but finding partners beyond journalism as well. What are the couple of, I'm telling you in short, next 5 minutes, I try to close. What are the couple of new approaches which can help us to see what is possible at a time when it seems that journalism is dying, maybe because of all the stupid things which are going on. But I think there are a lot of things happening globally, which gives us faith and hope that the journalism is something which is critical for every free, independent, democratic society. It's not just about the journalism for the sake of journalism. It's a journalism for the sake of free society, for the sake of democracy, for the sake of equal rights to everyone. And that is why people will somehow come together. There will be institutions which will come together. There will be journalists who will come together to redefine their way moving forward, to create new environments, to create new platforms, to create new business models of journalism. I'm going to share a couple of stories with you, which I'm personally very aware of, and my friends and colleagues are leading these organizations, and I've been there in these newsrooms. One of them is in Korea. Imagine Korea, South Korea, a very capitalist society, and journalism, investigative journalism, the space for investigative journalists was reduced, and there was a pressure on top journalists. One of them is on your screen, Young Jim Kim, one of the wonderful editors, senior editors from South Korea. They were somehow pushed by the market-driven forces not to do good journalism. So what they did eventually, they left the traditional organization. They started something called Newstopper. And Newstopper was essentially, as per Young Jim, it was just an idea to do something different and maybe a year-long project. Today, after 5 years, Newstopper is one of the world's finest media organizations. It's a team of, I think, 40 to 50 journalists based in Seoul in Korea, and they're doing incredible journalism. And they're also changing the way they deliver this content. They do great stories, and if stories are good, they publish them as books. And if they are like happy with those books and they see there's a audience for those kind of long stories, they make those books as documentaries and films. And it has been just phenomenal. Of course, they have their own challenges, but they have created a wonderful organization in Korea, which is based on membership. And it is also which we should, and I think people around the world are already seeing at them and their success and approaches and seeing whether we can learn something from them and create something of our own in our own countries. And I think certainly in India, we're a massive, big country and diverse country. I see there's a space for at least 100 new startups here. But who will lead those organizations? Who will create these new platforms? Do we really have journalists who have that vision? I think that is the question. In Germany, we have another organization called Corrective, and I would suggest you Google them and learn more about them. They have been phenomenal. Like Newstopper, they do the same thing. They have been senior journalists who left, they came together, they created an organization, again based on membership, and doing some incredible work in Germany. So the key message behind all this is essentially that you can't do everything on your own. There's no superhero in journalism. But somehow the journalists, the data journalists, the investigative journalists, call whatever you want, them. But eventually it was seen as like a superheroes, like the top guns in journalism who do big stories, great stories, they get awards and they do everything, whatever. But it's not going to be the same way in the future. Journalism will be a collaborative space. In your newsroom, you need to have a technologist, you need to have a coders, you need to have a graphic designers, you need to have a people who can sell your content. You need a good combination of a team. You can't be a one great reporter who will become the star of newsroom. No, those days of journalism are gone. Now the question is also, what is the recipe kind of thing for creating new journalists? Or what are the couple of core things journalists should do in order to be successful in the future? Or who will be the successful journalists of future? I think all journalism colleges, institutions across the world struggle with this question. But I don't think journalism is like a recipe which you can pass on to a next generation. No, absolutely not. Like you make a biryani once and you tell your next generation, this is how you make a biryani. No, you need to find unique ways, means, and you need to be aware of larger information landscape in which you are living and whether you're fixing in that information landscape or not. I think some of the things which we have to be extremely, extremely careful of and try to figure out whether we can develop these skills among the future journalists. And if you have a team which has these different skills, which start from different ways of looking at visuals, visual literacy, collaboration, knowledge of law, fact checking, knowledge of business, I think if you have a combination of these skills, you will find a future and you will create and develop a future media organization. I will stop here, but with this one single thought that no matter how much pessimistic the atmosphere is, how much it looks like nobody wants to be a journalist because it's like a gone field, but believe me, I think the journalism is the most beautiful profession in the world. It gives you a unique liberty, it gives you a unique responsibility, and it really gives you extremely, extremely, like a unique place where you are engaging with your communities at different levels, and you're telling their stories to a larger audience, because eventually all of us are storytellers. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. And Manju, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Said, for the great insight into data and investigative journalism. Now, our moderator, Tara CB, shall pick the questions, and the question answer session starts here.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Tara.
Let me move on to the questions. Here's your question. Data is increasingly easy to fake in the current era. How could one tackle the issue when there are very few examples to compare and contrast, especially when selective activism and bias is rampant?
Yeah, no, I think excellent question. I think data is as good as as the way you look at it, and we have seen number of cases where there have been a cherry picking of data and a wrong comparison. So I think the thing is that we need to have some skill set where we are able to verify the data and fact check the data. So I think for every future journalist, that's why I identified actually fact checking and data verification as one of the key areas which a journalist and future journalists and storytellers really need to make themselves aware about. Because if you do not have a skill to do a basic calculation, you will certainly struggle with the data and visualization of the data. I think data awareness, data literacy awareness is key area for journalists and for key area for future reporters and investigative editors. And I always believe whether it's a data or content, never believe anything no matter where the data is coming from. It can come from UN, it can come from the government, it can come from any organization in the world. Never ever believe data blindly. Verify, 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 and then attribute the data. Have a proper attribution that who has done this study, when was this study done, who created this database, when was this released. Have proper attribution in your when you attribute data to any organization.
Let us move on to the next question. Here is the next question. How can you extract such data and be ethical at the same time? What are the limitations regarding the same?
There are a lot of limitations, of course. That's why the attribution is so fundamental. And then there's a number of tools which you can use to extract data. You can scrap data with a lot of different tools, and there are now in most of universities now globally, there are data journalism courses where you are taught how to use Excel, how to use different commands in the Excel, how to convert PDF into Excel, and how to convert PDF tables into Excel sheet. And there are also codings which are, if you look at the Columbia University, they started their data journalism course just 2 years back, which is a dedicated master's degree in data journalism. And they essentially teach now even the Python coding, which is at a higher level. They even make that, they see that this is also very important, at least for some journalists who are really interested into big data, to have some coding experiences with HTML, with Python. So if you're really, whoever has asked the question, if you are really interested in understanding numbers and looking for a data-driven storytelling, and you certainly should go for a proper training and attend, maybe a course, a certificate course. At Data Leaks, we do a number of data boot camps we have done in so many, I think almost 14 Asian countries. Whenever we are doing next in Kerala, we will certainly make sure that we invite you for that session. But certainly acquiring the key skills in data is very, very useful. I think it's a very useful thing for any journalist now.
Saidia, is your next question. Can we trust the data of RTI to be used as a source for investigative journalism?
Yeah, I think, of course, yes. It depends, again, case to case studies. Like, you can't, there's no clear answer, yes and no. But certainly, if an RTI has been filed and what kind of data it is it a national security or is like a corruption, who has filed it? And if the response is coming from the government, you can of course quote that data with proper attribution and all. But it certainly depends on case-to-case basis. What kind of RTI was filed? What response was to that RTI? What kind of data was shared? And once we are clear on those different parameters, of course, you can use that data. I think number of journalists are essentially the RTI. They're using RTI as a very important tool to procure data from different government departments in India and rest of the country, in countries as well. I've seen in Sri Lanka for that matter, in Bangladesh as well. So like a lot of a lot of reporting happening based on RTI data.
Here, so next question. What are the challenges that a journalist faces in investigative journalism?
Yeah, I think number of challenges. I think there's no end to it. I think we're really having a lot of challenges. For the journalists in large, of course, the investigative journalists, certainly, I think there are a lot, number of challenges. I think there's a physical security, there intimidation, there's a legal threats, and the job losses as well, because a lot of organizations are not really keen to spend money in terms of news gathering. So that means essentially that in-depth investigative reporting, there are very few organizations in India today which really spend money on this kind of news gathering. So there are certainly there are number of challenges there, but that's the beauty of the profession, that like if nobody's doing it, and they feel like they don't have resources, that creates a very unique space for new storytellers, and that they can. Only thing is, how do you redefine your space in this changing environment? Like, what is your platform? What is your business model? What is your audience engagement model? How do you engage? Like, I shared the News Tapa story. They were really senior journalists, some of the best in Korea. And somehow, when they found there was no space for them to do great journalism, they created entirely new environment. And now they're doing so well in the country.
Okay, let us move to the next question. I think the data journalism is a new genre, so new questions are coming up. Here's the next question. Numbers and statistics are becoming all the more unreliable in today's times. Open sources are not primarily available. How do we access the right sources then?
No, I think, see, if you're a journalist, even the bad data is a good story. So if a government or any department is giving you a wrong data, that's also a great story. So that's how I approach data always. So once you obtain data from any official or institution, and then it's wrong, it's fudged, that's a great story. Then your job becomes like showing that the data which has been given to the parliament, given to the state assembly, is not correct, is wrong. And then you can do analysis of that data as well. So whether the data is right or wrong, in both cases, it becomes a great story.
Okay, let's move to the next question. What are the technical skills required to be an investigative journalist?
Okay, I think like you need a really passion for the journalist. Technically, I think there are a lot, of course, couple of skills now, essentially with fact checking. But if I say digital privacy is one of the key areas where you really need to protect your communication with your source, which is essentially that you can't communicate on open emails. You need to have a better emailing services. Like, for example, Proton is one of the best right now used globally by investigative reporters and editors. And you can use a Proton mail to secure your communication with your sources and editors and reporters if you're working on a big investigative story. I think your phones have to be secure and you have to take care of them. There are digital, like parameters. We have to make sure how to use phone and where to use phone calls, leaving footprints to your source. I think the key job is essentially, and that I think that's a big responsibility, how to protect your source. Of course, people can go after you as an investigative journalist. They can give you physical threats and legal threats. But I think your key responsibility, first responsibility becomes how to protect your source. So secure communication using Proton, and perhaps, and maybe protecting your browser as well, and fact-checking tools, like also like, I'm saying technically, fact-checking tools as well, like verification of videos, how to make sure the video you're using for story are correct, verification of images, and I think monitoring social media. There are also dozens and dozens of tools which you need to use to monitor content and data on the different websites.
Okay, here's your last question. Journalism and media is often seen nowadays spreading fake news related to many new topics or issues. Can it be stopped by giving the real news against the fake news?
So every story, becomes a bad story, but then it becomes a good story again. I think we're going through that phase where everybody is unhappy with journalism, maybe from some right reasons, but I eventually feel that, we'll be back. The good journalism, good information, it's really required. It's really so critical for us that each one of us have accurate information. And I think it's the lifeblood of a democracy, it's the lifeblood of a free society, that we are all well informed. And I think that that is essentially the job of journalists and investigative journalists. And my colleague Josie Joseph is joining now. So he will take that part. But I think it's really critical for a free society to have a good journalism. I don't think, a lot of people, and that's my last thing, I don't think that journalism is just a journalism issue or a media is just the media problem. I think it's a societal issue, it's a societal problem. What kind of journalism do you want? What kind of society do you want? And are you allowing a good journalism to flourish in that society? If you don't allow good journalism to flourish, you're essentially killing a free society. So I think that everyone in different environments have to come forward and support good journalism. Because good journalism matters, and free society matters, and democracy matters.
Thank you, sir. I think your opinions counts a lot for our upcoming journalists. Now, our HOD, Manju ma'am, will speak to you.
Thank you, Said, for the great session and providing insight on the relevance of data in investigative reporting.
Thank you so much. My really pleasure, to be honest, to be here. And I just love Kerala, so that was one of my reasons to join. And looking at my old friend and my Josie, that was another pleasure, which was I completely unaware of till last week he's joining. So wonderful to be here as well. Thank you so much. Really pleasure. And thanks a lot. Thank you so much.
We are also very happy for you accepting our request and joining us and giving such a wonderful lecture for the students and all the upcoming inspiring journalists.
Thanks a lot.
Inspiring journalists also.
Thanks a lot.
Far more data is now available in the open. Journalists can surely have depth in reporting using data. Best wishes for your efforts for bringing accuracy and quality in journalism. We look forward in having you for advanced session and training in data journalism. Thank you, Said, once again.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much.
So our next speaker is Josie Joseph. Josie Joseph is an award-winning journalist based in New Delhi. He is the founder of Confluence Media, an initiative for investigative journalism. Josie is also the chairman of Arimukham Media Private Limited. Josie has been editor special projects for the Times of India, an associate editor with the DNA newspaper, and has also been with Rediff.com, the Asian Age, Delhi Midday, and the Blitz. He was the national security editor of The Hindu. Josie's stories have fostered greater public debate and have contributed to significant policy and systematic changes. His reporting has resulted in several high-profile officials being forced out of the office, triggering the arrest of many others, as well as criminal and military investigations. Particularly, high-profile investigations have included, for example, the Mumbai Adarsh housing scam and the many misdeeds connected with 2010 Commonwealth Games in New Delhi, both of which contributed significantly to the anti-corruption movement of recent times. The Prem Bhatia Trust elected him India's best political reporter of 2010 for his scoops and revelations, which include a list of scams that have become familiar names in the political lexicon. He shared the award with Jyotirmay Dey, a Mumbai crime reporter who had been shot dead a few weeks earlier. In July 2013, the Ramnath Goenka Foundation, run by the Indian Express newspaper group, awarded him Journalist of the Year in print media. Josie holds a master's in international relations from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University, and was a prominent face of its international campaign in 2011-2012. He also has a postgraduate diploma in journalism. Josie graduated from the University of Kerala and completed his schooling from Sainik School. Josie was a fellow of Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies in Singapore and is an alumnus of Colombo-based Regional Center for Strategic Studies. Josie authored the best-selling non-fiction book, A Feast of Vultures, published by HarperCollins. The book, A Feast of Vultures, The Hidden Business of Democracy in India, is a stellar piece of investigative journalism. This meticulously researched book is a must-read for every journalist in India. Josie shall speak about investigative journalism in India. Participants can use the link in the chat box to ask questions to Josie. Welcome, Josie.
Am I clear, Manju?
Yes, very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the very warm and slightly exaggerated welcome that you've given me.
No, it's truth. It's truth about you.
I'm just doing my job, and I think all of us should just do our jobs, and that's what makes a country better. And it is because many of us, especially in the media, have failed to do our jobs in time that we have reached a situation where we are being forced to remember a British American editorial doyen because we haven't created enough towering editors and reporters and media organizations in this country. And also because many of our journalist friends and juniors and seniors, they've all drawn the wrong lessons from journalism. They all have wrong perceptions about what journalism is all about. So I just wanted to begin by recalling the fact that see the Harold event grabs global attention by his relentless investigation that he pioneered on the thalidomide medicine issue in the Sunday Times, after where he became editor in 1967. And if I'm not wrong, the first article could come out only by 1972. And over the years, the fight goes on till the end of 70s. And if you look at any other story that he and other Western media has done and become landmark investigations like Watergate, the one factor that's crucial, which is missing mostly in Indian media, is that all investigative stories need a lot of patience, perseverance, verification, credibility, etc. And this comes only when you are convinced that you are not the story. If you watch a television channel in India today or the social media, the sense we get is that the anchor assumes that he is the story or she is the story. The editor or the byline or the famous reporter on social media believes that he or she is the story. No. I think the first thing for any good investigative journalist to remember and to remember forever is the fact that you are not the story. You need to be the fly on the wall. Until you have that concept drilled in your brain, you can never be a journalist who will keep producing high quality, high impact investigative stories that can help a society march forward. And that's one of the reasons, one of the core reasons in Indian journalism why there are very few reporters of that level of caliber and who are repeatedly producing investigative stories like Harold Evans and his team did over 20, 30, 40 years in various places. So if you look at India's famous bylines, famous investigative journalists, you will realize that many of them are only known for their one story. They do one story, they get some awards and some recognition, some little fame, and then they start talking about that story. And in the conversation, they become the story themselves. Instead of being the fly on the wall, they sneak into the story and become the center of the story. You know how the minister bribed me, how this fellow threatened me, how I fought the legal case, and you become the story. And they become that one story wonders. So because I'm talking to students, and that's my first and most important takeaway that I would and advise to anyone who wants to be university journalism. Do not become the story. Let's be the fly on the wall. Let's report the story. Even if it has implications, you are able to overthrow people, results in arrest of many, whatever. Do not become the story. The second part, the second most important quality that I find missing largely, but not always, is the academic rigor that is required, which Syed Nagar was talking about in a different way, about data, etc. When I say academic rigor, investigative journalism, if you ask me which is that one profession which is very close to investigative journalism, I would say it is academic research. Because investigative journalism is ultimately you are making a claim or a statement or answering a question using sources, documents, research, etc. And unless you are capable of imagining that complex story with multiple evidences, multiple documents, multiple sources, you can't do this game. Anything else is not investigative journalism. What you see on TV as breaking news is not investigative journalism. So investigative journalism requires great amount of academic rigor. 6-7 years ago, I did a story about Sharad Pawar's family's links to IPL bidding teams, financial leagues. It took me three to 4 months. Every day I would come to office. I would sit in front of the computer, start looking at MCA 21, the corporate affairs website, database of companies, download balance sheets, annual returns, keep looking at it. Because I was told about one company in Pune which is bidding for IPL, which probably has financial links to Pawar's family. That's the only thing that I got that my source told me. So once I figured out which Pune company it was, I started digging into it. It's a construction company. A construction company usually has hundreds of subsidiaries. 3 months of digging and keep unraveling the layer. And by the 4th layer, I realized that, okay, all of these companies are significantly controlled by a small 1 or 2 little companies based in Baramati, which are owned by Sharad Pawar and his family. And I gave up 3 times. And that's what the second part of it is. Investigative journalism is persistence of academic rigor. And I think that's something which we are sadly missing, except for in some fringe media outfits, very few of them. Others are all missing that game of rigorous journalism. The fourth part of the story is that we are also witness. There are 2 large trends shaping the world of investigative journalism. Number 1 is the information ecosystem itself. Number 2 is a political ecosystem in which we do these stories. So I'll just first talk about the information ecosystem. So look at the last 5-10 years. Take the greatest investigative stories that have come out. WikiLeaks, for sure. The Snowden files, for sure. If you see OCCRP, I've been involved in, we have just released some stories on a Turkish, Iranian, Trump-linked business family. Behind all these stories are massive digital databases. Massive. Tens and tens of information which you need to figure out. So WikiLeaks unravel the State Department files, Iraq operation files, etc. And the Snowden, what Edward Snowden handed over were again, massive amount of data, which again threw light into the secret world of surveillance and intelligence. So one of the dominant trends of good investigative journalism is the ability, patience, and the need to explore digital databases. So many of the stories that I have done in recent times, one thing that I notice is common is that I'm often making databases talk to each other. So for example, I may know about a company in India which is accused of bribing somebody in the UK. So you start mapping the company, look at their company operations in India, take the documents, and then you find a subsidiary in Hong Kong. You go to the Hong Kong database, investigate there, find out that, okay, these companies controlled by Singapore-based groups. And from Singapore, you find the trail going into the UK, and from there, landing up in some tax haven. This is something. So ability to make databases talk to each other, ability to connect them is very crucial in this game now. The second part of the present ecosystem of investigative journalism, one I said is digital database. Second is the fact that the trust of people in the number of sources you can cultivate has come down. When I say that, simply put, earlier, we would have those reporters who started their career, let's say like me in the early 90s or 80s. We had more, and we still have probably more sources than a percentage journalist. That has nothing to do with who is smart or smarter. Actually, today's kids are much smarter. But we were doing journalism in an era when you had to physically go across to meet people. And when you meet people physically, face to face, you build a kind of trust which you can't replace by over phone or any of the secure platforms, anything like that. Today, because of thanks to communication capabilities we have, secure lines, etc., people are becoming lazy, or lifestyles have changed. So the number of human sources that nowadays report today has is very minimal. So if you ask me on my mobile, I might have thousands of contact numbers of my contacts. Some of them I may not have called for 8 or 10 years since I started saving the numbers on a Google Drive. But the fact is that if I call up and tell him, look, I'm so and so, he will recognize me because 10 or 15 years ago, we used to meet up for a cup of tea or at a press conference meeting, etc. So that human contacts have come down. Second part is also in those era, the 90s and until about 10, 15 years ago, there was no television channels or internet boom. So there was a number of reporters were smaller. So again, there was more human contact. So one of the things that I find missing in many of the reporters who are with me on stories, or I noticed, many of them do not physically move around, do the amount of movement that we used to do, which made us accessible and visible in a lot of places and got us sources. So that's a larger trend. Even if and among the students, if you make the effort, some of them will be able to move around like us, and that will make a huge difference in the impact that you make in your reporting. There is a final thing which I've noticed, which is that most of the investigative stories and most of the investigative stories are usually about organized crime or corruption, are becoming global. They're transport. They're across borders. They're spread across 3, 4 countries, 5 countries. So right now I'm working with a team in Philippines where we are looking at the Philippine President Duterte's Chinese contacts with China, Hong Kong, Philippines, etc. I'm working with another network. We just finished publishing the story on a Turkish businessman with Scandinavian, American, Iranian, Chinese links. And it's so complex. So large-scale investigative stories are becoming global. So the other thing that you need to do is to learn to build collaborations. A few years ago, in South Africa, I'm sure all of you remember the Jacob Zuma government. And there was this Gupta Indian family, Guptas who had captured the Zuma government. And when that scandal erupted, I played a part role with a network of reporters in South Africa in unraveling how the Gupta family was using Bank of Baroda's branches in South Africa for moving money. What did we get? We got 19,000 banking transaction details in an Excel sheet. The reporters there use all kinds of software. They were able to figure out how does it look like, all that. But ultimately, when they restored, they said, look, we can't go beyond this. We can say that there are 10 transactions of X and Y and Z, but we can't figure out who these are and what the reasons. I went around meeting people and figured out that the Bank of Baroda had actually done an internal audit of the entire transactions and they'd kept that report secret. So I managed to get hold of the PricewaterhouseCoopers audit, and it was all spelled out. This man was paid this many crores because of it. So you'll have to combine cross-border capabilities and skills and networks to unearth large investigative stories. That's the ecosystem of reporting. As I said, large digital databases, cross-border reporting, and the need to cultivate more human contacts. Sources are very important in this game. No digital database, no RTA, nothing can replace solid human context. Now, the other is the external aspect. The political climate in which we are doing investigative journalism has also dramatically changed. Number one, which I noticed, is that the state, especially in the last 6-7 years, I mean, thanks to the new kind of governance paradigm that we are witnessing, the state has become an aggressive bully against good journalism. So in India, we see that in most mainstream media do not want you to do investigative journalism. The smaller ones which are doing, they are being pushed back, bullied. So there is a serious threat to investigative journalism in this country. But it's not just limited to India. It's around the world. You see that across the world, there is a wave of government pushback against investigative journalism, which makes our profession all the more difficult, challenging, and intimidating and threatening. The political climate has also made it very difficult for us to find a living as investigative journalists, because the mainstream media doesn't want to invest much resources on high quality investigative stories. And there are not very many platforms which can offer this kind of jobs. Because investigative journalism of quality is very expensive. It takes months to do one story. But if given these challenges and this situation, if you ask me what will I do? Will I give up investigative journalism? No. I think because of the political challenges, because of the social realities, because of the fact that we live in a country where you have these pockets of economic glory in our cities, whereas you have, about 35% of our children who are malnourished, because you got a population as big as sub-Saharan countries, or almost as big as American population every morning going out in the open fields because they don't have bathroom access to defecate, because you got girls who are being raped on their way to the open fields, because we have almost another 30 crore people who do not have access to electricity, because we got millions of children who do not have access to education, and because more children are being pushed out of education and good food, nutritious food because of COVID and other government foolishness. There is all the more important that we become investigative journalists who are committed to the stories. Let us do our stories, and that's more important today. Today, investigative journalism has become a bigger service to society than anything else that you can imagine. And for that, I would urge all of you, and those of you can, to become investigative journalists. It's a great profession, challenging. Often it's slightly dangerous. But mind you, your stories can impact and improve the lives of millions at one go. That's the power of this profession. Before I end, I just want to tell you that do not become the hero of your story. That's, to me, the most important advice that I want you to take away. Thank you.
Thank you, Josie Joseph. For some moments, I was feeling that I am inside a classroom after so many years. And thank you. Thank you.
I hope it's a compliment.
Yeah, thank you. You're a very good teacher. I thought of calling you for classes over here. And now our moderator, Nino, shall pick the questions and of the audience, of the participants, and we can answer the questions.
Hello, sir. My name is Neenu, and I'll be handling the question and answer session.
Hi, Neenu.
So, hi. So, shall we begin?
Sure.
So, the first question is, this is the first question. How ethics of journalism can be maintained in investigative journalism?
See, actually, I keep telling this to friends that actually there are only two kinds of journalism in this world: good journalism and bad journalism. So let's keep aside investigative journalism for a moment. All good journalism, investigative journalism is good journalism, simply put. And so there is no ethical difference in it. I mean, it's see, morality and excellence. Two things are very lonely pursuits. We can't explain everything about ethics and morality to people. I mean, there are certain things which you can't explain, but the ethical standards that you have to follow in normal journalism is what you follow in university journalism to me. But there are some exceptions that you can notice. For example, the entire business of hidden camera in university journalism, which I don't do it. I personally don't agree with it. But I understand that in democracies like ours, we need that too sometimes. But there you actually compromise the ethics of some of those traditional ethics of journalism, because you don't reveal your identity, you trick some people into certain things. But other than that, I think ethically, it's the same ethics. See, actually, the same ethics holds true for academics, journalism, life itself. It's not a very complicated situation. It's not that we are going to do a surgery on somebody who's dying out there. It's a very mediocre profession like teaching, very mediocre profession like academic research, etc. So it's very basic. I don't think there is any ethical difference between good journalism and investigative journalism. But of course, there is a huge difference between bad journalism and good journalism.
Thank you, sir. So we will move on to the next question. And the next question is, this is the next question. Do you think nowadays investigative journalism has taken a form of intrusion into the personal lives of a subject which could lead to wrong speculation among the public?
No, I think, I don't know who was asking this question. In the question, I can say a couple of presumptions. The first presumption is that that which is intrusive is also counted as investigative journalism. When you practice classical investigative journalism like what I do, even when I find a murderer or even if I find a criminal, I treat him with compassion. I respect him. I will give him the space to speak. What you see on the television news channels today is not at all even journalism, it's entertainment and it's propaganda. So going into Sushant Singh Rajput's girlfriend's security guard and asking him, have you had your breakfast, is not journalism at all. Let's not mistake it. So I don't know. So I'm slightly concerned that whoever framed this question has mistaken that my carrying monkeys jumping around in Bombay as university journalists. They are not. They are entertainers. In classical investigative journalism, we do intrude into people's lives. But mind you, if you are an individual in public life, there is very little privacy that you are allowed. You are expected to maintain standards, and university journalism is actually investigating the ethical breaches that you do in your personal space, which you might think is for your personal benefits, but it has huge socio-political implications. So that, and even when we find that out, we give you the space and the time to respond to the allegations. So if I come across and if I'm investigating corporate, I'll give you the space and time. That's what. So I think all journalism from somebody's perspective is an intrusion of somebody's privacy. All journalism. But all good journalism is an intrusion of somebody's so-called privacy in the larger interest of the society. So, attacking the food delivery boy of Riya Chakrabarti's house, thrusting the mic onto him serves no public interest. I don't want to know what paneer is Riya Chakrabarti going to do. It's not journalism. But if you were to track down a drug mafia syndicate that is controlling Bollywood, if it exists, and get me the evidence of that payment details, that is investigative journalism. That intrusion is, I think, necessary for society to move forward.
Thank you, sir. So we will move on to the next question. So this is the next question. Sir, I feel the more a journalist speaks the truth, their lives are under threat. As a result, the truth of the story gets hidden. Is it worth going into this field? What is your opinion regarding this?
In Delhi, on Delhi roads, every day 5 people die in accidents. So would you not go into the Delhi roads? Would you not drive out? So risk and threat are part of life. And in most walks of life, there is threat of some kind of elimination, etc. So I don't look at it beyond that. And in journalism, obviously, if you're hurting the interest of a massive corporation or a big politician or some criminal, there will be repercussions. But I, as a policy, I do not like to talk about those things. I like to handle it at a personal space. Because if I start talking about my threat and if I start believing that I am the hero of the movie that you're watching, then I won't be able to do my next story. As a journalist, my compulsion is to go for the next big story. That's what I'm at. So I don't have time to talk about the threat that I'm facing because of today's story. But even if there is threat, I'm trying to argue that there is no profession in the world where there is no risk involved. If you don't take risk, if you don't move towards unknown, how will you make progress? So I think that's a very this is something that is this image of investigative journalists as a threatened species who might be selected out of the society to kill. Is an image partially created by the filmy journalists of this country. Threat is there in all professions, whether you want to be a doctor or an engineer, whatever you do, there are all kinds of professional threats. And I think we should not go beyond.
Thank you, sir. So, shall we move on to the next question? Okay. So, this is the next question. Does investigative news stories from a student or freelance journalist have any chance to get published in the news media?
Yeah, I think many of the platforms like Caravan, Wire, and all Scroll, they all encourage these stories. So I mean, my wife had all run a Malayalam website. We encourage people to do stories. There is, but it has to be really good quality. A lot of the material that I come across, submissions from students or freelancers, is very poor quality. They don't understand the need for sourcing and second source and third source and documents, etc. So if you have the quality journalistic product, if you have a quality article, nobody can stop you. Especially today, it's as if that everyone has a printing press at home with social media. So even if you put out a good story on your Facebook and Twitter, if it is well documented, I think you can't stop it from going around the world. And that's the best part of it. I mean, there may not be money in it, but if you want to spread information, so easy today.
Okay, so we will move on to the next question. How can investigative journalist always remain unbiased in its profession?
Who said we have to be unbiased? There is nothing unbiased. If you are going to stand by the poor, you are biased against the rich or the exploiting man, right?
Yes.
Everything that we do is politics. But it's about what politics do you practice. Nobody's asking you to be unbiased. We are all political elements. We have opinions, strong opinions. I think a good investigative journalist is that girl, that man who believes that the poorest amongst us also has the same right to the resources and the law of the land. He believes that if Mukesh Ambani can build his Antilia on a land that belongs to Waqf, then the poorest Indian has a right to build that 10 square feet, slum cluster in a public land. So there is nothing called unbiased in this game. We are all very biased. We got to be very biased. You got to be very biased in favor of the Constitution of India. Just because you want to be unbiased because you want to give equal space to others. You don't need to give that criminal who is violating the constitution same space as the man who is advocating for the constitution. We need to be very political. Don't be biased. Don't be unbiased. Be biased. Biased in favor of the Constitution of India. Biased in favor of scientific environment. Biased in favor of equality, fraternity, whatever you want to call it. Biased in favor of every progressive value that is returned into our books or constitutions. It's all very easy to recognize.
Okay. So we will move on to the next question. Do you think investigative journalism can be misused by a political party for their own benefit?
Of course, in India it has been misused several times. So if you go back to 80s, there was this very famous Senkits case where I think they forged evidence against VP Singh's son. Recently, some years ago, I think it was when the voting against UPA government is going, BJP tried to create this entire thing about bribery for MPs, etc. So all kinds of political parties you see. The other thing is, mind you, some of the most sensational information will always come to you because there is somebody who was arrested in this. It could be a political party, it could be a corporate. But the challenge before us is when information comes to you, how to verify it, how to ensure that you're not you're not the agent of somebody else. How do you elevate that information to the best of the society's benefits? So a lot of the information that like I get on my email or this in this computer, you'll find tons of documents, digital documents that have come to me from various. So people keep mailing me saying that, okay, have you seen this, Josie? I'm an anonymous missing whistleblower. But he usually is not an anonymous whistleblower. He is some corporate propagandist. He wants to leak out something. But once you have the information flow, the question is how do you ensure that you are not being misused? So for that, we use a lot of techniques as reporters. We develop. So for example, I have a simple technique. I do not trust any document that anyone gives if that person is not the first principal handling the documents. So if a police officer investigating a case gives me the police file, I will trust him. That means trust I have to show because he's investigating. But if somebody else gives me the file, I deploy my ways of verify. If I can't verify, I don't do the story. How much of sensation it is. Because of which a lot of stories come and go away from me because I refuse to trust somebody else's document. So we all develop our own strategies.
Okay. So we will move on to the next question. What should be the intention of an investigative journalist?
To make our society better, to improve the lot of our poor, to ensure that all of us can go to bed peacefully and actually sleep on a bed, to ensure that the welfare is spread across everybody, to ensure that the Constitution of India is not just a written document, but it's a living, breathing entity.
Okay.
The rest you can fill up.
Okay, sir. We will move on to the last question of our session, and that is how to handle public hate and what skills does a crime what are the skills a crime journalist requires?
See, as journalists, just keep in mind one thing: we are not standing for elections. Good journalism can't be done as a vote of popularity. If you want to be a popular kid in the family society, don't become an university journalist because you will end up irritating a lot of people. It's a very unpopular profession. So I have members in my family who still have problems with me doing certain kind of stories. Even today I got one of my friends messaging saying that I don't agree with you, this, that. So I'm saying that it's not a popularity contest. Journalism is not a popularity contest. Let's be clear about it. Second thing, skills required for crime reporting, right? See, when we use the word crime, a lot of Indian youngsters think that crime reporting is about reporting some police case or murder case. But to me, crime is organized crime. These are large, complex things Today, what you see is that billions of dollars are being moved around the world by drug cartels, by terror groups, by white-collar criminals, all kinds of people. And crime reporting to me is very challenging game, if you know what crime I mean. So it is what I said. We need to go back to being rigorous, be like an academic researcher, be able to make documents and databases talk to each other, be able to figure out, be able to think like a criminal. You need to figure out, right? I think those will make a good crime report.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for answering all the questions. Now I'll hand over the mic to Manju ma'am.
Thank you, Josie Joseph, for your thought-provoking insights and investigative journalism in India. We are privileged to hear from you. Best wishes for your endeavor with Confluence Media. Your efforts with Arimukham Media is ushering a new era in independent journalism. Through Arimukham, Josie is bringing the quality of global journalism to Malayalam with partnerships of Washington Post, Foreign Policy, Global Times, Slate, and Bloomberg News. We wish you a great success. On behalf of all participants, we thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Manju.
We look forward to have more sessions with you for our future events. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
So now we are concluding this webinar, the scope and potential of investigative journalism is broadening with the availability of new tools and technologies. Media students and journalists must acquire skills in extracting, interpreting, and visualizing data to have in-depth stories that is accurate and credible. Investigative journalism is more relevant than ever to unearth growing corruption, organized crime, and chronism. The struggle and courage of great journalists like Harold Evans must inspire media students and young journalists to work hard and be brave. We look forward to conducting more advanced training sessions in investigative journalism. On behalf of the speakers, Zaid Nazakat and Josie Joseph, we thank you all for joining this webinar. For the kind attention of the participants, the feedback form link is posted on chat box. E-certificates of participation will be sent to all who submit the feedback form. Take care and stay safe. Good night from Team Christ Nagar, Maranellur, Trivandrum.